And yeah, just to start out here, this is Dr. Glen Rein, and he's been doing a bunch of analytical tests with biological human cells, right? Yeah, all kinds of cells, and doing some actual quantitative data analysis for the Theraphi. So, yeah, here we'll hand it over to Dr. Rein.
Right. Dr. Rein.
Yeah.
Right, thank you. All right. I can advance my own thing. Oh,
Yep.
well, I need to that.
Yeah, it's the right button. You can just click click that button. Yeah.
So I
Okay.
am a scientist. I have 3 labs: a water lab, a tissue culture lab, and a this kind of lab to do these kind of experiments. That's what I do for a living. I test various technologies to validate the biological efficacy and to okay, right. And I have been working with the Theraphi for many years now, and we've put it all together and summing all of the different research that I've done on the Theraphi. And I have, to start with, I measure energy. I'm a biochemist. I have a PhD in biochemistry. I don't measure biochemistry because that's old school. I measure, I measure better energy, because all these devices are energetic. They resonate with the energy body, and if you want to measure the effects on the body, the best way to do it is with electrical energy. Well, energy in general. Electrical energy happens to be the body runs on electrical energy. It has all kinds of energies in it, and that's a whole lecture in itself. But electrical energy, there are electrical engineers and all this great equipment that you can use to actually measure electrical energy. And here's a couple of comments about the difference between AC, alternating current, and direct current. And the most important part of electrical energy is that you can, when you measure it, the way I measure it is I measure the resistance to the flow of energy. So I have equipment that introduces electrical energy and then measures and receives the electrical energy, like 2 different electrodes. And the flow and the resistance to the flow is what I actually measure, and that's the reciprocal of conductivity, which is the flow of electrical energy between point A and point B. And the really cool thing about that is that the engineers have figured out that you can measure real and imaginary resistance or impedance. So I'm going to talk a little bit in the end about imaginary numbers, which is the really exciting part. But the electrical energy in the body is not only in the brain and the nerve cells. It's through every cell in the body is electrical. The body is electrical, and actually the body is electrochemical. And the whole pharmaceutical industry is obsessed with the chemistry part. And I'm obsessed with the energy part. So that's me, Dr. Energy. So here's a piece of equipment that I use. It's called an impedance spectrophotometer. Which is a mouthful, but it measures impedance or resistance to the flow of energy. And as you can see, in the lower right-hand corner, there's 2 electrodes, and you put the sample in between. So most of the work I've done is with water and cells in a vial with the 2 electrodes stuck in there, so you can measure the flow of energy before and after being exposed to plasma energy. So I guess Paul should, a lot of people here did not hear Paul's talk on Friday where he talked about plasma energy. This is a very unique device because it generates 2 different kinds of energies, and as far as I know, there's no other device on the market that generates both plasma energy and electrical energy, not electrical, plasma and scalar energy. Scalar energy is now a buzzword these days, and everybody knows what it is, sort of, except the panel. There was a panel on Friday, and everyone's going, what is scalar energy? So it was kind of interesting. But the point is that water. So we're going to start with water. The body, as everyone knows, can be up to 90% water, and it's something you can take from the body relatively easily. I mean, it's accessible, it's there, and have used many different types of water. The type of water that seems to work the best is distilled water. So here's a simple experiment with treating water for 30 minutes. All the treatments were 30 minutes because that's what people do. You know, a little vial of water is not the same as a person, but I treat it for 30 minutes anyway. And here's a typical experiment where I would show, here I'm showing you the percent change. And if it's positive, it means that the flow, the resistance is positive, meaning an increase, but the conductivity is a decrease, because they're reciprocal, they're the opposite. So the point is that different kind of energies affect the body and water and saline and all in a different way. Some increase the energy and some decrease the energy. It's a bit like healers. They do the same thing. Some stimulate the system, some inhibit the system. I've done a lot of work with healers, and it's interesting that the energy can go either way. So it's not like it's stimulating is good and inhibiting is bad. The body does both. The body needs to do both. Sometimes it needs to speed up, sometimes it needs to slow down, depending on where it's at, so to speak, at a given point in time. So this basically shows us that after 60 minutes, it's still going up, and it seems the longer you treat it, the better. It will eventually plateau, but there is an effect right there, and it's a 45%, almost 50% change. That is a very large change. Another way, just by doing water, this helps me to know how powerful this thing is, because some and most devices don't cause a 50% change. They cause a 20% or a 30%. When you get it to 60% or 70%, then you have a very powerful technology, which in this case we can say resonates with and changes the water, the electrical properties of the water, by a very marked effect. So, but water, we have a lot of water, but most of the water in the body is actually saline, because there's salt in the body, and electrolytes and minerals. So that is more equivalent to what is called saline. So these are similar experiments done with saline, and you get a similar effect. And here we're talking about percent increase. This is after one treatment, to show you that there is a similar effect, and that after 12 hours, that's the saline just sitting there at room temperature for 12 hours. It does fade, and it goes down by about 50% after 12 hours. Energies don't last very long, especially in water. Healing energy, however, does last for weeks and even months. So this is one way to distinguish one kind of energy from another, how long it lasts and how strong the effect is. Okay, point taken. Now let's move on to another kind of liquid. This is DNA in water. Now DNA, everybody knows about DNA. So what do I have to say about DNA? That's a whole lecture in itself. So I'm just going to say it's human DNA. There's a special store I go to where I buy it. It's extracted from female placenta, so it's a mixture of many different females, and they put all the placenta in a blender and mush it all up, and then they purify it. So they got to get rid of the proteins and the fats and the sugars and everything else. This is just pure DNA, double-stranded DNA floating around in water. And believe it or not, DNA has its own electricity. DNA conducts electrons and protons, and it either hops on the outer part of it as it jumps, down the helix, or it goes through the central channel. And there is scientific evidence that DNA is both a semiconductor and a superconductor. Well, if DNA is a superconductor, then it's a quantum molecule. It has quantum properties, which makes it really interesting in terms of the mechanism of action, how the Theraphi works. Now, plasma, again, is not an electromagnetic field. It's a whole different kind of energy. And if it resonates with quantum molecules, then that's, in essence, a kind of a quantum energy, or it wouldn't resonate with a quantum system like DNA. Okay, so DNA, we all know DNA and the genetic code, but I'm kind of giving you the basics about the other properties of DNA. DNA is an antenna, and DNA can pick up and sense energies. It's a fractal antenna, was published by Martin Blank in 2001, but in 1996, just for the record, I published the theory about DNA as a toroid, a toroidal antenna. And then they discovered shortly after that DNA does exist in the body as a toroid. It wraps itself around circumferentially in the shape of a toroid. So that's, the ultimate antenna, shall we say. Right. DNA, as a result, DNA responds to all kinds of energies in the environment. So plasma energy and scalar energy are here, but it also responds, these are actually only the energies that I've measured. There are lots of energies out there in the universe, so I haven't measured them all, but I've measured all those. And DNA is amazingly sensitive to all kinds of energies. And the electrical properties of DNA are known. Nucleic acids are the components of DNA, like amino acids are the components of proteins. And here's just an article for any scientists in the audience, maybe not. Yeah, showing some of the electrical properties of DNA. And that's pretty much what I said before, except that the quantum tunneling is another kind of flow of energy through the molecule, again supporting the idea that DNA itself is a quantum molecule. Measuring quantum tunneling is a little tricky, but it does exist as a property of DNA. Okay, so when I measure DNA, I measure the conductivity of DNA, the electrical properties of DNA. So, and as I said, this is a published, established, oh God, this thing got all mixed up. The one on the left is the control, and the one on the right is after one Theraphi treatment. This was actually for 60 minutes, and as you can see, the effect is a 60%, and this is a rather large change. The longer you do it, the larger the effect. So this is just to show you that A, DNA resonates with the energy coming off of the device, and B, responds in a very large way. Okay, now, if you damage DNA, all the slides we just spent an hour adjusting all the, are they screwed up there? Yeah, they're screwed up there. Okay, well, there we go. Oh, anyway, use your imagination, or just listen to my words. This is more to remind me what to say. So the words will communicate. So if you treat DNA with a cell phone, you damage it. That's actually in the scientific literature. You actually break the strand. DNA's got two strands. One of those strands will break in the presence of a cell phone. And as a result of that, you get a 50%, nearly 50% change in the, this is the wrong slide and the wrong, I'm sorry. Okay, so you get a 50% change in the impedance or the resistance. So the resistance goes down, but the conductivity goes up. Why is that? Because this is the imaginary impedance, not the regular impedance. As I was saying earlier, it's a decrease in the regular conductivity, but here we're showing an increase in the imaginary conductivity. But the point is, we'll talk a little more about that if I have time, but the point is that if you pre-treat the DNA with the Theraphi and then zap it with a cell phone, you can see the reduction on the right of the damage. It's almost a 50% reduction of the damage. So the Theraphi will protect the DNA from the harmful effects of cell phone energy.
Nice.
Okay. Right. That was a 5G phone, actually. Yeah, a brand new, whatever they're called, i14, yeah, right. Okay, so now let's move on to tissues rather than liquids. And in this experiment, I am growing some human skin cells in tissue culture and zapping them with the Theraphi. So I just put the Theraphi to two bulbs close to each other, put the Petri dish right in between. This is a 30-minute session. Cells don't like to be out too long, but 3 30-minute sessions a day apart. And then I measured the change in the amount of ATP. ATP is chemical energy. So here I am measuring I am a biochemist, so I guess I'm allowed to measure biochemical parameters in living cells. And this shows almost a 20% increase, and that's actually a lot for a molecule like ATP, which will give you energy and has all kinds of beneficial effects. If I had more time, we could talk about that. But, okay, so not only does it affect water and DNA, but it affects human cells in tissue culture. In tissue culture. Okay, next slide is experiments I did with my whole body. As I said in the introduction, the body is electrochemical, electric fields. The body is known to respond to electric fields, magnetic fields, and electromagnetic fields. But there are also intrinsic electric fields in the cells at the cellular level. Obviously, the brain is electrical, so all kinds of electrical energy in the brain, but also the bone and the skin and many cells. So you've got all this electrical energy flowing in and between all the cells in the body. And they study skin cells in this context because it's involved with drug delivery. So if they got drugs and they want to get a drug into the cells via the electrical fields that are in the body, the skin is the model system that most people use. And particularly the skin cells, the cheek cells in the skin, which are called buccal cells or mucosal cells. This is mucosal tissue in your mouth. And since I'm not a nurse and I'm going to take cells from my body, for me, drawing blood every time I do an experiment is a pain in the butt. So I don't use blood cells, but I use cheek cells. I lie in the bed, I take a measurement before, lie in the bed, and take a measurement after being exposed to the energy from the Theraphi. Okay, now here's where we get into the fact that we can measure both the real and the imaginary components. And this shows you that even from an electrical engineering point of view, the imaginary component on the right, I can't imagine what that looks like. Oh, good, that looks good. That one worked. It shows you that there's much more information. This is showing you the real versus the impedance or resistance versus on the x-axis, the frequency. It shows you on the right that there's much more information to be gathered from the impedance measurement. So that's, to me, exciting. And what I do is I measure the ratio of imaginary to real. The higher that number is, the more, I mean, you know, imaginary numbers, the more imaginary the numbers, no. Imaginary numbers are numbers that mathematicians came up with to help explain certain phenomena. And imaginary, I think I have a whole slide here about imaginary, yeah, here. Imaginary numbers are the fundamentals of quantum physics. They are renowned for their magical properties. They are a more fundamental measurement than real numbers. And they are associated with imaginary spatial dimensions. Kind of wrap your head around that. I mean, you think of X, Y, and Z axis as real dimensions, but there are imaginary dimensions. So the higher that ratio, the more esoteric, the more imaginary is the system that we're studying. So here is the effect of the Theraphi on my cheek cells, and you can see that the real is on the left and the imaginary is on the right, and this again is percent change, and you can see that the imaginary is 60%. So it's a rather large effect, and it's in the opposite direction than the real numbers. Now this phenomena right here is something I've never actually seen before, and all the various experiments I've done with all the different kinds of energies, I've never seen the real and imaginary go in opposite directions. They're mathematically related to each other. They should be the same. I mean, imaginary is usually stronger effect. That's true. But it's never in the opposite direction. This is what it normally should look like. And this is what happens when you use an electromagnetic field. This is some previous research I did with 432 hertz. The imaginary number on the right is stronger, but it's in the same direction as the real. So this effect that we see here, where the opposite effect, is not typical. And it just shows you that the energy that's coming off of this thing is very profound, has a profound effect on the body, and it has an esoteric effect. I don't know what other word to use than imaginary. So, in conclusion, I just said that it affects, I've shown here that it affects the body at 3 levels. At the systemic level, which we just saw, the whole body. At the cellular level, working with skin cells and mucosal cells in the mouth. And at the molecular level, working with DNA. And of course, water itself connects everything. Electric fields in the body are changed. The flow of energy through the body, through the cells, is actually what we're talking about. And this is similar and used in what's called microcurrent, actually promote healing responses. So the fact that we're affecting the system means that this is having a very profound effect on the body. Thank you.
Thanks, Glenn.
Okay,
Well, that's really interesting. Sorry. Do you think that, we talk about time reversal could this be what's happening with those imaginary numbers going into the opposite direction? Could that have anything to do with the time reversal effect?
That it's a bit like going to another dimension, because the imaginary numbers would function in another dimension, and scalar energy, for a start, works in functions and moves in 5D. So the fact that, and I don't know if it's the scalar or the plasma that's doing it, but clearly this is working at a higher dimensional level. Or that's one interpretation of the data.
Oh wow, that's super cool. Thanks. Thanks, Glenn.
Thank you.
Okay, wow, that's really cool. So that's over the years we've gathered a lot of anecdotal evidence, and a lot of people have asked about, doing lab studies, and so yeah, we've got some good significant data now, and that's really exciting. I also wanted to talk a little bit about Theraphi, because both Quantify and Theraphi, I want to talk a little bit more about Quantify, they both utilize light and sound. And the light that's being emitted in the photonic emissions from the tubes is easily absorbed by the body. And these become biophotons. So there's a whole science of biophotons and how your body absorbs light and can actually keep that light energy inside of the body. And really what it comes down to, like Glenn clearly showed, we're electrical beings. 30 years ago when I got into all this kind of stuff, people would say, oh, the body has nothing to do with electricity and that's all crazy pseudoscience and all these things. But it's a great how we've come this far to actually where modern academia and science is really understanding deeper and deeper all these quantum effects and the electrical properties and the light properties to our body. So both the Theraphi and the Quantify utilize sound and light, so it's a combination of them. And in the beginning, in the Bible, in the spiritual tradition, when God created the world and the heavens, He moved across the waters and said, "Let there be light." And that first is the sound of the emanation of the proclamation of letting there be light. So the first was a sound, then there was light. And when we looked at yesterday, we saw that serpent in a tube that was generated with the plasma, and how plasma takes on form and shape, and that's sort of where the word comes from, the ancient Greek, meaning to take on form. And initially we called that in the blood plasma, but in these sort of electromagnetic plasmas, that's what they do, is take on form as well. And according to the sound, you can produce all kinds of shapes. And if we get some time, we'll get that far in the slides to show how all life forms are resonant from these resonant frequencies in nature, and all form in the fact that, as hominids, we have 2 arms, 2 legs, and our whole shape is part of that resonance. And so here, we're talking about cosmic things and extraterrestrials and things like this. This hominid type forms or seem to be repeated patterns all throughout the cosmos and other beings that have that. And it's just part of the imprint, and in the biblical structures, we're created in the image of God. So that whole idea is manifested into this form that we are. And Glenn mentioned a bit about 5G and Quantify. Quantify basically conditions the space, and we've shown that it has effects on EMF and EMF protection, because it's not that it's blocking EMF and 5G signals, because if something actually did that, you wouldn't get a reception on your phone, right? So, but what it's doing, it's more part of your body's entrainment. So it's providing an alternative signal that's more coherent for your body to resonate with, and your body will naturally do that. It's like when you put on some music and you start tapping your toe and nodding your head, your body goes into these sympathetic rhythms with what your environment is. And so the biggest thing about 5G and all this thing is not necessarily the frequencies. People are like, oh, the gigahertz frequencies are very dangerous and all these things. It's not really about frequencies. It's more about the noise and the distortion. And if you listen to your Wi-Fi or your 5G, it literally sounds like demons' fingernails scratching down the chalkboard. Like, it's all random noise. And that's the incoherence that throws all your cells into disorder, and that's where the damage gets done, and even all the way down, as Glenn was saying, to the DNA, the genetic level. So what we want to do is restore that order, and essentially that's what the Quantify and Theraphi primarily are doing, is restoring those coherent waves, so put it in harmony with nature. And all the technologies and frequencies I work with are based on nature. So we use phi ratio and utilize the frequencies. So Quantify is capable of playing sound and modulating the plasma with the sound at the same time. This was the original version 1.0, and version 2.0 is out now, and it's sort of a miniature compact model. And you can have up to 6 tubes on each one of these coils, and Let's see if I got a slide with those on. And you can have multiple coils set up now. So everything runs fiber optically, and so you could do a large room. You could have 6 or 8 coils in a large room, 6 tubes on each coil, and you really can provide that energy dissipated throughout the whole space. With the Theraphi, it's limited to basically 8 feet apart is the farthest you want to get those tubes. But with the Quantify, the beauty is you can spread them out over a yoga studio or a dance floor and play music through, get the sound going. And people who are real audiophiles and that, they like to use the Quantify with their sound system, and they say the sound actually sounds better. And you know, some people spend $50,000, $100,000 on a really good sound system, and any little thing they'll pay like $300 for a really good copper power cord to plug it into the wall, and then they say, "Do you hear the difference in that expensive power cord?" Maybe it's because they just paid a lot more money for it, but you know, some people are on that level, and a lot of these guys have said to me, "Wow!" And I think it's because that resonance is going through your body. So you remember we talked about the longitudinal waves that are being projected off of the tubes, and that compression and rarefaction goes right through your body. So you're feeling it in the deepest center of your body. Patrick Flanagan did a lot of work with that type of stuff with his neurophone in the early days, and he was actually able to allow deaf people to hear through sonic resonance with transducers on the skin to resonate inside the body, and it takes a while to tune into that, but once you get the feel of that vibration, then your brain will adjust to make out sound from these vibrations. So it may be possible if you even didn't have the speakers on, and you got into the deep enough and to be able to feel the longitudinal waves coming off the plasma, you would hear it inside as well. So sound is longitudinal wave as well, and that the scalar component that we talked about yesterday is where it's utilizing this phase conjugated array. These are basically like an antenna array. We use phase conjugation in cellular transmission actually to point the antennas where the hot spots are, where they want to receive the signals stronger, and it's basically a way of converging the phases in the relationship between the tubes. So these tubes are 180 degrees out of phase, and that produces 2 longitudinal waves that collapse in the center. And we went into detail on Friday, it was like an hour and a half, and gave the deep dive into understanding how a scalar field is really created. Mistakenly, people call it scalar waves and that, but it's more of a field effect. And when you have that charge collapse, that's when the charge collapse of the 2 longitudinal waves collapse into counter space. So it's also got to do with free energy and anti-gravity and the things that we were talking about the other day, because when you can understand what's happening in that scalar components to the math, then you unlock the key to gravity and time. And so if you go back and if you hadn't saw the first part 1 lecture to this, you can understand that more. So that's what's happening with the Quantify. And just like the Theraphi, animals really are sensitive to the field. And this is a Quantify setup on a bed. And somebody had sent me this photo just the other day. And these cats are just hanging out, lounging, and because animals are really sensitive to the fields, they just kind of intuitively know. So it was really cool to see this, where they just jumped up and they're just lounging in there and loving it. And plasma itself, everybody's heard, plasma is 99.9% of the, I'll go back if you want a photo of that, 99.999% of the universe is plasma, right? And we're light beings, and we are electrical beings, and the two kind of go hand in hand. When you ionize a gas, the outer electrons are jumping off the atom, and basically when they jump back on the atom, they release a photon, and that's the light you see from the tubes. That's the light you see. So we can produce that ourselves, and there's been a recent study where they are showing the point of conception when a sperm actually fertilizes an egg, and right at that point of conception there's zinc there's like hundreds of little pockets of zinc atoms, and each pocket contains about a million zinc atoms in each of the cells, and when they combine, they release, and there's a bright flash. And this is actually plasma emission at the point of inception from the sperm fertilizing an egg, and there's a flash, and they caught it with fluorescence on the camera at Northwestern University. Okay, so going back into the form and the creation and sound, this is Hans Jenny, and he came up with this term cymatics, where he showed using sound all the different geometrical patterns that can be formed. And so when you're using sound in your system, you are forming these geometries in space, and it's a big part of the resonance. And how I was saying about that serpent in the tube that formed, and there's millions of different patterns, and they all correspond to the resonant frequencies of the medium that you're resonating. So using different shapes of plates and things like that, you can get these very complex geometries. And so yeah, I've played a lot with that over the years. This is showing the longitudinal waves, how they move, and as compared to a transverse wave, which is on the bottom, and that's a cycle of voltage and amperage, and they move at 90 degrees out of phase as they go through. And sound is made up of various different components, and in the modern day sort of synthesizer, we can synthesize any types of sounds by combining various waveforms: sine wave, triangle wave, square waves, and sawtooths. When you look at a synthesizer on your voltage control oscillator, you can make these different types of forms and then start to get more and more complex waveforms. So the other thing that's unique about Theraphi and Quantify is they work with complex waveforms. So I started out in the early days just pumping square waves into RF amps and just punching, and that's how World Rife was destroying viruses, bacteria, and those kind of things, just by punching really sharp square waves in, and those were destructive frequencies. You could kill viruses, kill bacteria, and just blow them apart with those frequencies. But the more complex you get and the more coherent they are with living biological life forms, then that's where the magic happens, and you can do a lot of neat tricks. Here's a Moog synthesizer. It was created by Bob Moog. So I played a lot with modular synthesizers and everything over the years, and MIDI guitar. This is a MIDI guitar where I actually play all the sounds of the synthesizers with the guitar. And so I can produce all kinds of really unique sounds that, you know, things you with these kind of synthesizers, you can do so many things. There's just infinite possibilities. You can create sounds that you've never heard before. And so I've experimented a lot with creating my own frequencies. So that's what you can do with the Quantify, is put your own sounds in there. And you can also use the old standard Rife frequencies with a Spooky 2, those kind of things. And recently we've been hanging out with Malcolm Bendel, and he's created the Thunderstorm generator, and you can come by the booth and talk to Roger about that. We met at the Cosmic Summit conference last year. It was a lot of fun, and Malcolm's come up with this plasmoid unification model, and laid out all these frequencies from nature into this amazing section where he's divided it up into these 4 sections and laid all the frequencies on there. And we've been playing with those frequencies through the Quantify and getting some really interesting results. And Sheila Rahman has done a lot of work with that as well, and she's actually here today. So, hey Sheila, hello. And yeah, so really exciting. We met in Sedona, I guess, at one of the plasma conferences last year, and yeah, so she's been hanging out with Malcolm. She did a presentation at the Cosmic Summit as well. That's really exciting. So all this stuff is based on Tesla technology, and built a lot of coils and experimented a lot with high voltage electricity and everything over the years. And this one coil here, I call it Junior. He runs at about 30 kVA and puts out 5 million volts. I can control it with MIDI through synthesizers and play it with that guitar you saw. It's really cool. And if I can get this video to run, we'll just show you what it does here.
They set that up at the Integratron one time too out there.
Oh yeah, yeah. So the Integratron, that's a really good point. I don't know if I can forward this, but it'll take a second to go up. But that Integratron is a really unique structure. You know, it was designed to control that energy. And a friend of mine, Eric Dollard, he was one who actually wired that up with a massive Tesla coil. And the stories behind that Integratron are incredible. Let's see if we can get this to this more minute. Yeah, just to give you an idea what this thing, how it sounds.
There you go.
Oh, here we go. So yeah, we're just getting it warmed up. But yeah, this thing's capable of shooting lightning about 20 feet in the air. There we go. Ozzy Osbourne, Mr. Crowley. That was the first thing I played on it. I was like, oh yeah, let's get this thing
Are
going.
they modulating the carrier or something to get it to?
Yeah, it's basically modulating the carrier wave and breaking it up, so it's a pulse width modulation. Yeah, so I'm just converting the MIDI into PWM that runs the coil.
Will it damage other technology?
This thing will annihilate other technology. It'll also kill viruses, bacteria, dead. Everything in the air is dropping out, insects, anything standing near it. So that's what I call destructive frequencies rather than the constructive frequencies of Theraphi and Quantify. So. Oh, theraphiofficial.com. Yeah, and Roger's here, Theraphi.tech, T-E-C-H. Yeah. So thank you, everybody. Thank you. Thanks for coming.
Hi. I came to this booth in an excruciating pain. I've been in excruciating pain for weeks. And I was walking around, I could barely even stand it. And I stopped here at this booth, and it's amazing. After 15 minutes of being with this equipment, I'm completely pain-free. I got one treatment, and I was good for at least 35 minutes without any pain. For me, that's like miraculous. I'm so grateful.
In the matrix, in that ether, and that's generating these longitudinal waves. That's why they're moving longitudinally, coming out from this counter space. So those two waves are canceling each other out, and when you have that wave, a longitudinal wave, bounce back on itself because it's going into counter space and coming back, that's time reverse. So the time is reversed in this wave, and then it coheres with your cells in the DNA all the way down to the mitochondria. And all the way down to the DNA, and it brings back the blueprint, the original blueprint, so it restores the DNA to its original memory.
Okay. Yeah.
You're already at 30. So I literally.